Today, India is often framed as a developing nation pulling itself out of poverty. But for most of recorded history, the exact opposite was true. This chart visualizes the global economy in the year 1700. That massive slice right there is the Indian subcontinent, producing roughly a quarter of the entire world's GDP. At this time, it eclipsed the combined economies of Europe. When the newly formed British East India Company arrived on Indian shores in 1600, they were desperate for high-quality textiles, spices, and advanced metallurgy. However, British manufactured goods were considered practically worthless in the thriving Indian market. This map shows the only way the British could actually do business. To buy Indian goods, the East India Company had to ship physical gold and silver bullion across the ocean and pour it into the local economy. The British entered India as dependent customers, injecting their own wealth into the subcontinent for the privilege of participating in its booming economy. That dynamic flipped completely in 1757, following a military clash known as the Battle of Plassey. Robert Clive, an ambitious agent for the East India Company, defeated the Nawab of Bengal. With that victory, a private British corporation acquired the legal authority to collect taxes across one of the wealthiest regions on Earth. Look at this updated map to see the accounting trick they pulled next. The flow of precious metals from Britain is abruptly severed. Instead, the company began filling its coffers with local Indian tax revenue. They used that extorted money to buy Indian goods for export. When those textiles reached London, they cost the company nothing, registering as pure profit. The East India Company transformed into an occupying corporate state, effectively using India's own wealth to purchase its own resources for British profit. To maximize this extraction, the British implemented brutal new land revenue systems. Under policies like the Zamindari and Ryotwari settlements, peasants were forced to hand over 50 to 60% of their agricultural yield, payable strictly in cash. This crushing tax burden drove farmers into inescapable debt. To survive, millions had to stop growing food for their communities and shift to exportable cash crops, like indigo and raw cotton, to satisfy British industrial demand. Simultaneously, the British targeted India's world-leading manufacturing sector. Parliament passed protectionist laws back in Europe to block Indian goods, while company agents manipulated local prices to drive master weavers into bankruptcy. This image shows the massive scale of the Lancashire cotton mills. With the local competition suffocated, the British flooded the captive Indian market with tariff-free, factory-made textiles from England. Through these engineered policies, India was forcibly demoted. The world's premier manufacturer of high-value goods was reduced to an impoverished colony that exported cheap raw materials and bought back British products at a premium. A common defense of this period argues that the British modernized India by building its vast railway network. The railways were explicitly designed and routed to rapidly siphon heavy raw materials from the deep interior straight to coastal ports, and to quickly deploy British troops to crush local resistance. This hyper-efficient extraction network, combined with the forced transition away from food crops, created a terrifying level of food insecurity across the subcontinent. During famines spanning from Bengal in 1770 to 1943, the British administration continued to export massive quantities of Indian grain for foreign wars, while millions of local citizens starved to death in the streets. These famines were the predictable, deadly outcome of an economic machine engineered to prioritize imperial extraction over human life. This economic and social oppression eventually triggered the 1857 rebellion. While it failed to secure independence, it forced the British Crown to officially take over the colony from the company, though the systemic drain only intensified. It took an Indian intellectual named Dadabhai Naoroji to put mathematical proof to the empire's systemic theft. Naoroji published the drain theory, meticulously calculating how unrequited exports and exorbitant administrative charges, billed directly to the Indian taxpayer, were actively draining the subcontinent's wealth to bankroll Britain's own industrial development. This mathematical proof fueled a political awakening. Decades of struggle finally culminated in the 20th century, forcing the British exit and the birth of the modern republic in 1947. The final audit of colonial rule is stark. Under the guise of a civilizing mission, the British Empire took a nation holding 25% of the world's GDP and left it with just 4%, executing the largest systemic wealth transfer in human history.